Okay, let me make sure I have control of the slides. I think I had control when I didn't think I had control. Let's see now. Okay, so I think first of all, I just introducing myself and Imelda. We've known each other a long time in the Los Angeles area working in science teacher education. And I think we've both been in the 100K and 10 network for many, many years, 7, 8 years. And when Kimberly Staples proposed this idea of getting a team together to look at how to improve science teacher education, we didn't even know, because now I'm at USC and she's at UCLA, we both kind of jumped on independently to this project. So I just want to say, for those of you in the audience that are thinking about project teams, I think there are great ideas out there. When you find one you like, you jump in and you meet people who you haven't met before but have similar passions about what you want to do. And I think I speak for both Amel and I that we're very passionate about making sure every kid has access to a strong science education experience, and we believe that teachers play a key role in that, and so we're both science teacher educators. But Kim brought a lot of passion and direction from her perspective in Kansas, and the whole team, and it's great to see Deb's here too, so I hope Deb's going to participate. She was a key member, and everyone contributed, and we all learned a lot from each other. I just want to say, in particular, I also, since USC has an online program where we have our students all over the place, it was important for me to get other perspectives about what are the best ways to prepare teachers in a variety of different contexts. And so participating in this project team got a lot of interesting insights. So just kind of digging into our work, it's really Kim. I want to give a lot of credit to her. It was her brainchild, and we all kind of jumped on because we all had these similar passions. And hopefully Deb will chime in at the end too. Imelda and I have kind of thinking in LA about how can we improve our own teacher education programs. And so that's when we all got together for our first project meeting, we set out with this goal of assembling some resources that teacher ed programs could use to prepare their candidates for high need schools. And we also spent quite a lot of time defining what does it mean to be prepared to teach in a high need school. And so we got to this idea of culturally responsive STEM teaching, empowering and standing with marginalized and historically underserved students and their communities, and kind of taking a critical stance, an inquiry stance, a humanizing stance as we approached how to prepare our candidates. And so that's kind of our goal. And then even talking about what is a high need school. So our team came from a lot of different perspectives all across the United States. And so Imelda actually put this together. It's a Wordle showing all these ideas around what is a high need school. And I think you're going to find out as we work to prepare resources to help other teacher ed programs out, we came up with some ideas of different groupings to support teacher ed programs, so you could come to our group and figure out something that could help you do a better job of preparing your particular science teacher candidates. So I think Imelda's going to take it from here. Go ahead, Imelda.
So, you know, in regard to the Wordle, I think we were emphasizing both the assets and the needs of schools all over the country, because we really came into rural areas and urban areas, but not just looking at it from a deficit perspective, but also really trying to highlight and bring up their assets, and how can we best link to those assets to frankly make science real, relevant, so our students feel comfortable, feel that they can be in science, feel that science is accessible. So really looking at not only needs, but also the assets, and how can we bring those forward. In this work, honestly, a lot of, you know, reiterating what Fred has noted, Kimberly was an amazing leader and framing these pieces and these documents. And we did start off with the goals. We have 5 prominent goals, and some of them they're all interrelated, but some are a little bit more related than others. The goal 1 and 3 is really about creating these categories for organizing some of these resources. And how do we develop criteria for these resources that we might present to our 100K and 10 community? Goal number 4 is actually collecting some of those resources. All of this work is work that is already in process. We have some artifacts from all of these pieces. Goal number 2 is really looking at developing a conceptual framework for quality STEM education in high need schools. So what does that look like? And that's a dialogue, frankly, that is ongoing, but we do have some ideas and some framing to present along that conceptual framework. And lastly, the surveys. Some people have already participated in the survey that was developed because we really need to get more input. We really appreciate hearing diverse perspectives, and I think our work is stronger when we learn more about what is going on in science education throughout all of our experiences in our programs in our country. So if these are the 5 core competencies for the framework that's developing, and again, Kimberly Staples really put these ideas together, and in my mind, I was thinking about, wow, how do these connect to the work I do as a science teacher educator? And in our program at UCLA, looking at core competencies and looking at career readiness, 21st century skills, but also this collaboration. I think about how our program is grounded in social cultural learning theory and how we are stronger when we hear each other and collaborate together. Instructional design. I think every single one of our programs comes at it in looking at instructional design that best can work with high need schools. And this is going to differ depending on where you are. But for me, for us here at UCLA, we're looking at four components of instructional design that best relate to our context: content rigor, content discourse, equitable access to content, and classroom ecology, and how all of these interplay to best serve and best connect to the needs of our students in urban schools. One of the pieces that we're really trying to connect to as well is the humanizing STEAM piece, or STEM, which has more to do with making things real and relevant and taking who students are into account, their identity, and how they fit into these spaces. Who can be in STEM? What are the messages that our underserved minorities are hearing of who can be in STEM and who is in STEM? And how can we amplify and diversify, bring in role models so they can begin to imagine that they can be, and they are, and their experiences, a lot of their life experiences, connect to STEM. So how can we bring those forward in a purposeful, intentional way? So when we're looking at instructional design, it's going to vary across contexts, but I think it's really critically important to think about how we're framing instructional design and how we are connecting to who we serve. In terms of implementation, this has more to do with who and where our students are being situated. So how is this work going forward in schools? And how are we being intentional about putting our pre-service teachers and our teachers in spaces where they can grow and learn and feel supported? So this implementation piece has a lot to do also with leadership and who works together and how they're supported in the field and how they can grow. This is hard because it's going to vary across different, and it's hard to develop those partnerships and networks. If we have alum, I personally, that makes our work a little bit more feasible. And if we have supported leadership, that makes the work more feasible. And if we have our pre-service teachers in schools in partners where they are placed together, that really helps foster peer collaboration and teacher development in different ways, and they feel more supported in those spaces. But beyond that, it's also the resources. What is at the school? What might our teachers have access to that may bring this work to fruition? The democratic pedagogy, that really has to do with how are our students, our K-12 students, being supported to have that voice and advocacy. So that's, again, going to vary in the different contexts that we have. But we really wanted to hear that student voice and how that can be listened to and integrated into science instruction. And finally, equity in STEM education. How can we build in role models, disturb these inequities that exist, and develop counter narratives, so our students and teachers can feel that, yes, students can, and students themselves can believe, I can, and I have something to contribute. I already know something about science, you know, and my parents in my families, my community, there's science all around me. It lives. And how do we bring that forward? So disrupting the structures and providing opportunities to programs to potentially highlight and provide opportunities so more of our underserved minorities, more of our students in rural areas can access STEM in meaningful and productive ways. So those are that's goal 2. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll pick it up from here. And I think Kim was really pushing that we had to have a conceptual framework so we could dig into the work that we were going to do. And so after we established this framework, we then set out to create resources aligned to this framework that could help teacher education programs. And so we thought as a group, and I definitely want to give a lot of credit to Deb on this.
Yeah.
And also, I think David played a big role in helping us to organize a resource and a framework of resources that whatever level of teacher ed you're at, you could then find resources. And we came up with 3 kinds of groupings of these resources. And the first, we had to kind of adopt resources. There's a framework matrix for adopting the resources. I'll show you that in a little bit. And then we also came up with a kind of, not an exhaustive list, but a pretty extensive list of research-based articles and readings that teacher ed programs can use with their students to align to this framework to really prepare them to work in these high needs contexts. And the one that we're still need a lot of work on is curricular resources. And so we started a website that teachers could go to get resources to engage their own students in science education. So I'm going to dig into a little bit of the details of this right now, and this was not the committee that I spent the most time on. So Deb, if you want to chime in, we can unmute you and you can share, but I know there was a lot of work that went into this framework for how we could support teacher ed across the continuum. And you can see from even pre-credential, because we all came from different experiences. I'm in pre-service education. I do a little bit of in-service work, but we all had some much later and more in professional development, and some even earlier before they had decided on being a teacher. And so we tried to align our resources across this continuum. And then what's not shown in this diagram is as you go kind of vertically down, core areas. Like one of them, this first one you can see here, is analyzing beliefs and forming visions. It's important to get at your own beliefs and what you bring across this continuum. And so there were resources along those lines. And they need to be different if you're first experiencing thinking about teaching versus you're a 10-year veteran. And so we tried to have something for everyone out there in science teacher education. And so we can come back to this if you have specific questions about that. You can see now here's a further kind of explanation, and we're still thinking about how we're going to package this, so it's kind of a work in progress. Maybe we present this in San Diego where Imelda is right now. Down the line we can get more information and we can share our resources. But we came up with these domains from culture, pedagogy, classroom management was another thing that all of across our different experiences, and how do we do that in an equitable type of way, and then the PD piece. And so there's a lot of information that basically Deb and really you should chime in here, Deb, if you haven't left already, but I think they did a lot of work to align this and then to get our resources and align it to this too, so that if you're a teacher ed program starting to work more with urban context, we could have something to help you out. this is what our project team wanted to do. We shared our collective resources and we put it into a system that you can now kind of find and search with key articles. And so that was the goal 4, is we need some research to back up these practices. What are some ideas? And we've compiled a pretty nice list on a Google Drive, and it's kind of a lot. We've begun to categorize them and put it into a repository that the network and others could potentially use to really improve teacher ed. Going back to Kim's vision of we can do better. In science teacher education, we can do better. And we all have good ideas, and put all our ideas together, we would be much more prepared to prepare our candidates for high needs communities. And so we even created a survey, and I think Kim really took the lead on this, and it's in the Kansas State Kwl Charts system, where we created a survey to reach out to the network to see what you needed also and what your experiences were in teacher ed, and we could use this survey information to even enhance and develop our work as we've got worked over the last little over a year, or about a little bit over a year.
Yeah.
So Imelda and I are really good colleagues, and we've worked together for 15 years now, but I think it's that kind of work, and these ideas, we're here in LA, we're spending most of our time working in this context, but I think we can share our ideas, and I think we can also learn from others that are doing similar work in a variety of contexts all over the US. And I think that's the biggest advantage of the 100K and 10 network, is learning from each other and adding your knowledge to the network to kind of synergize our work. So Imelda is going to lead us into some questions that might lead to a discussion of where our project's been and where we might go. Go ahead, Imelda.
Yeah, so these are some questions Fred and I are posing to the group. And if anything is missing there, feel free to add on anything that you might want to share, because as Fred noted, we are stronger when we share and when we learn from each other, and building this collective understanding. There's such power in that. So
hey,
are
Imelda,
yes.
I'm looking in the chat, and I think Deb wants to, can we unmute Deb, or does she have to unmute herself?
I think it'd be great to hear her perspective before we go into the question.
Yeah. Kendra, can we see?
Hi.
She can unmute herself.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Oh, we got you. Go ahead, Deb.
Okay. Yeah, it took a team. It took a village. Can we go back to the picture where it's the colored picture of the, there we go. Right there. When we developed this, what we tried to think was across the lifespan of a teacher. And so we took some of the seminal work in teacher development and laid it out in those stages, and consolidated a number of readings across those stages to say, sort of at these particular stages of teacher development, what is a teacher most focused on? And then the team went from there to identify the sort of domains of interest. And that's really how we laid this out, is basing it on the research in the field about teacher development. There is very little in the field about STEM teacher development. So we don't really know if a STEM teacher sort of follows along these patterns or not. But we felt that that was a defensible way to organize our thinking about the kinds of resources that would be helpful along each stage as we began to identify those. So that was our thinking there, and that's really all I wanted to expand upon.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I think that that's in every stage. You know, I work with pre-service and first-year teachers, and sometimes a cognitive load in those moments is they're so stressed that, yeah, it is developmental and incremental, and they're ready for different things in different stages, and it's beautiful how this is laid out. So if we can go to the question.
Let's go back to the questions, yeah.
Yeah. Are there any pieces of this presentation potentially that need further clarification? What pieces of our work can you integrate into your teacher ed program potentially? what might be difficult to integrate, and what ideas might you want to add and share that might further guide the thinking that we're doing in our group. So we'll open it up for questions. Oh, 3 new messages. Oh. I know earlier we had a few questions that were typed in the initial survey. Perhaps we can start with one of those. Yeah.
One question I have is our collection of resources that we gathered and all our annotations, et cetera, are those available now to 100K and 10 participants, or how is that being shared?
Yeah, I don't think that has been shared yet. And I think that's one of the next steps that we need to kind of definitely, the framework can be shared. I think the resources, and as we talked about earlier, the lit review, it's a pretty nice set of readings that I think would be a great starting point for any teacher ed program that's really either changing or beefing up their emphasis on urban education. I think the web piece, the other resources, needs a lot of work. So I think between now and the 100K and 10 summit would be a great time to figure out how we're going to work with 100K and 10 to share our work.
To disseminate some of the thinking, yeah.
Yeah.
From one of the questions, I remember reading is, how is this project team thinking about supporting new teachers to develop an asset-based approach to using students' personal and community resources to connect to content? And frankly, I think all of us, given our programs, have tried different approaches in regards to this, this piece, building on student assets. I know in our program, we have a series of courses that focus on community, identity, and families. And we strive to develop pieces in thinking, reflective pieces, where they think about their own assets first, their own experiences, and really strive to understand student assets that are often unseen. Mostly what gets put on media, how are the communities we work with are portrayed. They're often portrayed in a negative light. So we ask our teachers to move beyond that by engaging in dialogue and conversation. So we have structured assignments like the Community Inquiry Project, where they engage with the community in different ways to demystify some of potentially their potentially deficit notions, or just not understanding or not having the opportunity to listen to students and family and community. So I think there are different and unique ways that each of our programs have engaged in the work of highlighting the assets. So once there's an understanding, the piece is like, how do we integrate it into instruction? And I think that's why I think the work in terms of cultural responsiveness and really looking at that humanizing piece, STEM with a purpose, for us comes, more into light.
And maybe I'll give a specific example of what we're doing in USC's program, and I think many others, we're not the only ones doing this, but we use the 5E model, which is the engage, explore, explain, elaborate, and evaluate model, and I think that lends itself well to kids, regardless of the context they're living in, to try to connect science to their lives. And so we really push our teachers in the engage phase to find out what the students know and bring to the classroom, regardless of what you're studying. And so we use things like Kwl charts that also lends itself well to inquiry. So if you don't know what a Kwl chart is, It's what do you know? And usually you start with some scientific phenomena and you make some observations and you write down what do you know about this. And then the W is what do you want to know? It's the scientific questions around whatever that scientific phenomena is. And so as we work with our beginning science teachers, we kind of help them lay out this framework for how they're going to plan their science instruction. They may not know every kid in their community that they're working with, but we emphasize getting to know them. What are they bringing? What are their interests? And then making those connections in the engage phase, and then leading into doing an exploration that can connect to them. And then one other thing I'll say, I just had my students last night, and I'm doing some work with elementary teachers too. And you investigate some scientific phenomena, but then in that elaboration phase, getting students in groups investigating some phenomena that they're interested in. So my teacher last night was looking at the water cycle, and why not? And she got into aquifers, and she connected into some book about willows. I can't remember what it was, but at any rate, she was integrating in the literacy strategy too and reading. But then in the elaboration phase, we pushed her to now let students look at aquifers throughout the world. So depending on where your students are from, you could do some research there. You could look at pollution in particular aquifers. There's a lot of choice where you could structure for your candidates ways to empower them to learn science that's interesting to them, connected to them. And Louise Moll calls that those funds of knowledge, really connecting science to the students and their interest, what they bring to the class. And that's just one example of how we do that. And I think if you talk to each one of our group members, we all have ideas about how we do it. And now we're on our way to making a resource that others can now access and consider some of these different ideas about how to best prepare science teacher candidates for high need schools.
I think another way is really emphasizing discourse. We do emphasize discourse a lot in our programs, and trying to, through dialogue, better understand and listen to what students know already, and how do we make that thinking visible, and how to potentially integrate some of those understandings into reasoning around scientific phenomena that they observe in their everyday. But yeah, for us with that discourse piece, it also involves advocacy. So once we know something, how can we act and do something about it? One of my students last year, he did a piece on the integumentary system. It was a physiology class, and he started looking at colorism, the concept of colorism, and looked at Snapchat filters, and how Snapchat filters, most of the ones that the students he had an open inquiry like, oh, which filter do you use and why? So he had a survey, and he noticed that most of them, and they had made this discovery, most of them used the Snapchat filter that made them lighter. So it brought in a conversation around colorism, and why is that? So then he looked at critical media literacy and looked at images of how this has been used, frankly, throughout history in terms of colorism and what it means to be, and how different cultures and different spaces have integrated these concepts, and what does it mean to how people are treated. So with that, he also embedded a big piece on the skin and how it works, and how melanin protects us from the sun. And students publicly displayed visible posters outside of their classroom, but they also had affirmations around their color and how their color connected with themselves and their culture and how it protected them. So it was beautiful to see that public display of being proud of who they are and having a better understanding of the science behind it, as well as being aware of the social inequities that have accompanied colorism throughout history.
I know I see one question in the chat. Sonia, do you want to unmute yourself and say where you're coming from and introduce your question, or I can read it for us if not? I'll give you 5. Oh, there we go.
Do you
Maybe.
hear me okay?
Yeah, go ahead, Sonia.
Sure. I'm Sonia Pryor Jones. I'm with the FAB Foundation. And I was listening to the amazing assignments that you were describing in the courses. And so I was curious to know if beyond the course that these assignments were embedded in, if the pre-service teachers walk away with a specific credential and something like appreciative inquiry or emotional intelligence certification.
So maybe I can answer that. And we're both in California, Mel and I. Maybe some of our colleagues in other states have those types of additional credentials. A lot of what we're talking about is embedded in certain ways into the California credential. And so we have to address and meet the credentials in California. Wherever you are, you have to prepare your candidates to meet those particular guidelines. And but I think we can do more. I think what we're talking about is how we dig deeper into what the students bring and build on that. To answer your question, we don't have any additional certifications that go along with it. We just embed it into our teacher ed work. I don't know if Deb is on the line, and I think you have to prepare candidates for your particular context and yeah.
But that's really an interesting point. You know, I think there are a lot of micro-credentialing pieces coming on to the forefront, and it makes me think about maybe not just a micro-credential in STEM, but potentially a micro-credential in cultural proficiency of some type, right? With a STEM focus. That might be something to think about and be considered for the future. But no, right now,
I think, Imelda,
yeah,
you should tell them what you do for accepting students into your program, though, so that we kind of have a focus for what we're looking for in our teacher candidates. And I think that helps us to know what kind of experiences the candidate's coming from, and that helps us shape what kinds of coursework and fieldwork they then need to participate in to be prepared to work in high needs communities. Tell them a little bit about what TEP does.
Yeah, I mean, we really focus on students who are focused on working for social justice. And I know that social justice phrase is now, a lot of programs focus on it. Ours started in 1992 after the Rodney King case and all of the turmoil that happened in Los Angeles, and the consequence of why is that, and how can we be part of the solution, and how can we stand with and support our LA community. So that's when our program started, and we really look for students who have experience in urban settings. Because we are an urban school district, we focus on, because we primarily work with LA Unified, although not exclusively, we focus primarily on urban education. So most of our students have some experience already in urban settings, and they know that the purpose of our program is to really work with students in urban settings. And not only that, but also try to change the broader structures, empower our students to be the agents of change and what that might look like. So we do a lot on critical race theory. We do a lot on really trying to work with counter narratives and really look for student assets, funds of knowledge, YOSO's cultural proficiency, transformative resistance. How can we channel the anger and the issues that sometimes happen when we're frustrated? How can we channel that into something more positive? A lot of work on trauma-informed practice. So a lot of our teachers come in without understanding that this is part of what we do in science, in math, in social studies. So how can we transform the pedagogy within the science, within the science elements, right? Because there are a lot of critical issues in science that frankly are also tied to injustices. Environmental injustice is just one of them. We have so many issues around diabetes and climate change, and how do we integrate those and make those connect to our communities. So our students know that that is what we're trying to do, and frankly, we don't do it alone. It's building a network of peers, of cohort of students that frankly we strive to. We know that we are only there every week, every in our program. It's a 2-year program. Beyond that, we strive to potentially have them work together. When we can support, we support. But we have found that the most effective way is for them. It really comes from them in the communities, more so than from us. So we really go through a selection process where they interview in a small group. It's not a one-on-one interview. We call them fishbowl interviews. And we see how they interact with people and how they work together, because that's a big part of our program, that social cultural learning piece. And really, they are very strong in content. They need to, have at least a 3.0 and in their undergrad. So our program is a little different in that in California, there are a few programs that focus on undergrad preparation for teaching. Ours is a graduate program. So they come in with the understanding and the purpose that, yeah, I want to make a change. I want to help be part of that change. How can I be connected to that and work together and think together? Because this work is ongoing, and there's always something new to learn, and it changes and shifts with every new child that we meet, with every new context that we're in. But it's part of developing that inquiry framework, that collaborative framework, and trying to understand why and how, rather than having the answers, and being comfortable with that without not knowing, right? And trying to engage in that work, that hard work of trying to problem solve.
So Imelda and I could talk with you forever about this. This is kind of, and I do this similar. I used to be at UCLA, now I'm at USC, and I'm online working with my teacher candidates all over the place. But really, we have this passion to improve science teacher education. And so I put my contact information in the chat if you want to reach out to me. I did want to, just to go back to Sonia's question, point out there is a new version of How People Learn, that there's a social emotional learning piece that happens to be written by one of my colleagues here at USC. She wrote that chapter, and so you should definitely reach out to that as another resource to guide how you might be working in your teacher education context. So if there are no other questions, feel free to email Imelda and I hope you all decide to participate in a project team. We learn as much as we share, and I think that's the beauty of the project teams. And hopefully we'll figure out how we're going to take the resources that this group has worked on and share it at a later date, and potentially at the summit, which is in San Diego later or early next year. So I think we're going to wrap things up for now. We thank you for your participation. Feel free to reach out to us, and we'll pass it back to 100K and 10.
Yeah, thank you.
We're good.
That's great. I was trying to grab the slide that has your titles and your contact info on it, and just a huge thanks to Fred and Imelda for leading and sharing so much of this really important work. I'm really just struck by hearing at the end of the time that you've been working together on how much your team was able to accomplish, and really just building a framework is no easy feat. So you have so many great materials to share, and to everyone who's joining us today, we'll be able to share those with you as they're finalized, and certainly be able to make sure that those across the 100K and 10 network are able to share thoughts, reflections, and even put this work into action. So again, thanks to you both, Fred and Imelda, and thanks to Kimberly Staples, who you've shared, really brought some of the vision and leadership for your team. There are so many other ways to keep this work going. And just wanted to really thank everyone who's on the webinar today. I think we clicked too far, but we have, this is the 8th in a series of 12 webinars that are happening this fall. And there are 3 more remaining, some of which might be really interesting to you all as well. And you can find the full list and register for those on at calendar.100kand10.org. And now that we've reached the end of our webinar, we just wanted to share that, reminding that we'll send along this webinar recording to you tomorrow. It'll be hosted on 100kand10's Grand Challenges website. But if you joined us today, we would love your participation in a small favor for us to share some feedback about the webinar today. If you check your email inbox, you'll have received an email from Team 100kand10 that asks you to complete a survey that's truly under 2 minutes long, and we'd love for you to help us by completing that. We really take your feedback seriously and consider it when we're thinking about how our webinars can be useful and how we can support the amazing work of project teams in sharing it with the entire network. So I just want to thank you so much again for taking the time to complete that in your email inbox. Huge thanks again to Fred and Imelda, and thank you to everyone for joining us today for this webinar. We look forward to hearing from you or seeing you on another one upcoming.
Thank you. Have a great one.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.